The BREWtallyspeaking podcast is proudly sponsored by Starving Artist Brewing. Starving Artist Brewing may be a small speck on Michigan's beer map, but they say big things come in small packages. A brewery who really puts their money where their mouth is, supporting underground artists far and wide. Making delicious beers with the simple belief that you should judge beer, not people. BREWtallyspeaking podcast is proudly sponsored by Rockabilia.com. With over 500,000 officially licensed items in their online store, you're guaranteed to find something you need. Use our code BREWtally and get 10% off your total purchase order. Now on to the show.
People say you have to have a lot of passion for what you're doing. This rings true because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person would give up. It's really hard. And you have to do it over a sustained period of time. So if you don't love it, and if you're not having fun doing it, you're gonna give
up. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the BREWtallyspeaking podcast. I am your host, John, and this episode's guest is Alex from Despised Icon. And this was kind of interesting. I didn't realize till the very end that he was literally finishing up packing to go start the European run that the band is on. And it was one of those things where if you're watching the video version and you'll see toward the end of the chat, he literally had everything kind of laid out and just needed to finish packing. But man, what a trooper. I definitely don't think I would have taken on any press leading up to me doing and having to be somewhere to catch a flight. I just don't trust myself. And more to the point, I don't trust flights to not have something go wrong. So I definitely would have never done that. So kudos to Alex for taking the time to do this chat, knowing he had to fly at a certain point after it. That said, this was a really fun chat with basically an icon, no pun intended, of the beginnings of what would become deathcore. And it's not necessarily a genre that I was super into when it came out, but you know, having friends like, you know, my friend Fox from See You Next Tuesday, you know, they used to do some stuff with the band, and obviously just seeing the name around, you know, I know we talk about the MySpace era of bands and what it did for bands, and, you know, being in your mid to late 30s, early 40s, you know, you can't really understate the importance of MySpace back then. And it was one of those things where it really was what championed a lot of the underground scene, you know, your Job for a Cowboys, your Despised Icons. You know, I remember seeing the band name fucking everywhere. If you were into hardcore, if you were into metal, if you were into any of the kind of underground scenes back then, I can't tell you the amount of Despised Icon shorts, like mesh shorts I saw going to shows. I can't tell you how many windbreakers I saw of Despised Icon or a Job for a Cowboy or, you know, even early Suicide Silence and stuff like that. Like, those bands were fucking everywhere. Like, if you didn't see the merch at shows, you saw it online. You saw somebody wearing that. You saw the song on someone's MySpace profile. So even if you weren't really going to the shows or weren't going to see those specific bands, is how I really should put it, you were still aware of how important they were to this scene, how important they were growing up. And it was a thing where I feel like I felt that there was that genre that was coming, and I know I've said this on the podcast, where it's like that was kind of the beginnings of me living on my own, me having to pay a bunch of bills and not having a lot of money. And there were just some bands that went by me, and Despised Icon was one of them. I knew very much who they were, but I wasn't into that scene initially. And as time has gone on and I've gone to see more shows and gotten to see a lot of these bands over the years, supporting some of the bands that I was into, I kind of was able to understand what the scene was, what the genre was, why kids were really into it. But I hopped on way late. And I'm not going to front and be like, oh, I was around since Despised Icon was, you know, first starting. I mean, I was technically, but I wasn't, in the fact that I was not a supporter, I was not a fan. Just as I wasn't of Job for a Cowboy and a lot of those other bands. They just were at a time when it wasn't for me, literally and I guess figuratively. But it's interesting to go back through and have some of these people on from these bands, as it really does allow me to kind of have a revisionist history of what I remember versus what actually happened. And a lot of times people, I think, are really afraid to look stupid or not knowledgeable on something. I love when someone kind of calls me out or corrects my line of thinking, because that's how you grow. That's how you learn about things. And I mean, maybe people don't do it on such a platform where literally anyone can hear them saying an opinion and then someone go, well, not entirely right, but, and then basically correct the line of thinking. But to me, I love that. And I also love that this show affords me to kind of step out of maybe my own comfort zones musically at times and kind of really have to be immersed in an era or a sound that I wasn't familiar with. And that was kind of the fun thing about leading up to this conversation, was going back through Despised Icon's discography and kind of seeing what I lost, seeing what I remember about the band, and getting to talk to someone kind of about the career or the fact that they even have a career. I mean, as you'll hear, we talk about all those things. So actually, let's get into my conversation with Alex, and I'll talk to you on the other side of it. The funny thing is like, you know, when I first started doing this show, I met Toby from Emory, because they were doing a podcast and they did a lot of like phone calls and video stuff. And at the time, like almost 6 years ago, that wasn't really a thing. So I was like, what are you guys using? Because like everything seems so expensive. And it was funny because he's like, oh, we're just using this like call recorder thing for like $100 for the lifetime of you using it. It'll record FaceTime and it'll do Skype. And I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. And it'll separate tracks and like all this kind of shit. And then just kind of like everything, like it was like, oh, we can't keep up with Mac anymore. So now the FaceTime function of it doesn't work, or we're not doing it anymore. And it just is like a reminder at times, even doing this, that it's like sometimes nothing is wrong with the technology we have or that we use, but then magically everyone's like, well, I got to get something new. I got to do something else. And then you're just like, but there was nothing fucking wrong with the thing we were using. Like, why are we so obsessed with new shit when the old thing isn't broken?
I feel you on that, but sorry, buddy, Skype is obsolete.
I don't know. I still, sometimes when I log in, I still see all the phone numbers and all the Skype things, and I still see people are still active. And okay. It definitely was also one of those things too, where I mean, maybe I shouldn't say this, but it's definitely one of those things where I'm like, I do think a lot of people would be surprised to see that most everyone's people's emails are just literally their name at gmail.com.
I over text, over video chat, I just prefer old school phone calls. That's me. But
yeah. Hey. I mean, I don't know. Do you feel like, I haven't figured it out, because like there are a lot of people who are like, whatever you're going to call and tell me, you could just text me. And I'm like, not really.
No. Whenever I get too many texts or too many emails, I'm like, no, I have no patience to type all of this out. Not that I can't, I can, but it's just, I'm just going to call you, hash out all these details. Worst case, I'm just going to send out like an email or text afterwards, just, with overlining everything that we just discussed so that everything's crystal clear. I see Brewtallyspeaking. So brew. So you're into beer, I guess. I manage a craft brewery here in Montreal called Massorum. So lots of emails and whatnot, and so lots of meetings. So obviously, I just outline everything afterwards, crystal clear. I like to get from A to B more proficiently.
So I've been trying to think, actually. Do you feel like, because I mean, I know you guys have been around. Shit, I know you guys formed in 2002, and that's when I graduated high school. So I feel like we roughly have to be the same age. I'm 38, so I feel like tentatively we're within a couple of years in either direction of each other age-wise. But do you feel like the kind of getting to the point and actually wanting to communicate is something more of a generational thing at this point? Or do you feel like I don't know, because I've been trying to figure out where the disconnect of wanting to communicate and wanting to actually have conversations, where it kind of stopped and what caused it.
I'm 1980, so last year of Generation X. I just turned 42. Obviously, what you just described is generational. I experienced my entire adolescent years without a smartphone or social media or internet in general. Not that it didn't exist back then; it just wasn't widespread like it is now.
Right.
So, I think you adapt to some of the modern times, and then some of it depends on your personality. I like a bit of both, but like at some point, like not knocking it, I understand the importance of social media. It just I'm not as present on it anymore, just because it gives me anxiety. It's just based on my values. I feel as though there's some oversharing going on, and I have nothing against it. It's just, if that's you, then more power to you. You know, it's your life. You live it how you want to. But as far as like I'm concerned, I don't feel like doing stories and stuff like that, or going on TikTok. Again, nothing against it. It's just not me. Simple as that. So I prefer to just, instead of sharing a story of what I'm doing, I like to just have a conversation with the people that are dear to me and tell them, hey, today I did this. Not everyone needs to know what I'm up to,
No, and it's funny. Like I just kind of had that same kind of thing happen recently. Going to Atlanta, like that's kind of like my and my wife's favorite city we go to. Usually try to go like once a year. We're actually getting ready to go back in a couple of weeks, and we took a friend for the first time a couple of weeks or about a month ago at this point, and was one of those things like they are like 7 years younger than us, and they were just constantly like Instagram story. Like if you looked at the Instagram story, I don't even know if you could see the individual things because they're with them.
I know.
And I remember like I was having a moment with my wife. We were at the aquarium, and I was like, I feel like she's going to take a photo of us because we look cute together and all this kind of stuff. And then sure as shit, she was like, hey, turned around. She's like, you look like I just ruined your whole day. And I was like, I was having a moment. I'm in the moment. I don't need the photo of the moment to then post somewhere so someone can, say, oh, don't you guys look cute together? Yeah, I fucking know that. We got married. There's a reason we're a couple. Like I know what being a couple looks like from the outside, and I know what our relationship is when we're in it. And I'm just like, I don't need a photo of it. Like that was kind of same with like a lot of the trip, because it's a place we go so often. I don't feel the need to document any of it, because I'm like, this is for me. This is kind of where I go to recharge and recenter and get away from everything, where it's for me. And it's for us, if my wife's included. And it's just one of those where I feel like it was the first time really kind of seeing someone really live something through the phone and for, likes and comments and all that stuff. And I was really turned off by it, because I've already been shuffling away from social media as a whole. Like I use it because of the podcast, just very much like I'm sure you do for the band stuff. But if I didn't have to do one for the other, I probably would delete most of my personal shit, because I'm kind of don't care anymore. And it's very weird to kind of come to this conclusion as you get older. You're like, I don't care if anyone knows what I'm doing or what they think, because most of the time it's dumb. So who cares?
I mean, pros and cons to everything, my friend. Pros, as far as I'm concerned, I've traveled quite a lot. And in hindsight, sometimes I'm like, hey, I actually haven't toured in 3 years. I'm flying out today to Europe, starting tour this weekend. And part of me, in the last 3 years, I was like, fuck, I have no souvenirs of these trips, I haven't documented anything, So it doesn't have to be black or white.
It can be gray.
Yeah, I'm down with gray, but like
you gotta start doing this when you travel, though. You gotta get little keepsakes of where you go.
Oh, dude!
And then there's your memory.
That's the tour leg right here. I got a bunch of countries on here. Both of these arms is in Leeds, actually, in England. But no, especially when you're a musician or artist or whatever, or self-employed and just trying to live off your craft. I do understand the importance of trying to be kind of a online personality. You got to build that engagement with your audience and whatnot. It's just the older I get, the harder it is for me to do so. And I hope it's not misinterpreted as, you know, I don't care about people that support me, or I don't care about this or that. That's not how it is. You know, I'm actually very thankful. You know, I'm 42, going back on tour. I've been touring for 20 years, and none of this is possible without the people that support me in this endeavor. But at some point, it's just, I have to live my life in the now, and the social media thing is just not for me. And that's cool. If it is for you, that's cool too, you know? Anyways, next question.
Well, you know, it's funny. I mean, even saying that, you know, 20 years of doing this, it's funny to think about when you all came out, you know, the scene then, you know, you were kind of doing something, you know, the idea, I think even at the time, I remember you guys kind of getting shit because, oh, there's two vocalists. That's weird. That's different. That's not really been done. And it's funny to see now there's a lot of bands that have two vocalists. And it's one of those where, you know, and I remember even saying this back then, it's like, why not just get someone who can do both? And it's like, because sometimes like you can't. And like, isn't it cool that you are able to have someone when you go see a band, they're actually able to sound like they do on record? Because instead of having someone who has too many syllables to say in a sentence or in the song, now you have someone that can back you up and it sounds really good. And I go, I think we might see more bands doing that. And even going to the band that I was playing when you came on, Seven Dust, I love the fact that there's 3 different singers in that band. So at least at some point it sounds, and you get the full spectrum of what they've done on a record. And I don't know, but to go
see, I feel as though we're heading towards the opposite of what you're describing, because vocalists or musicians in general nowadays, especially within the heavy music realm, they discovered that technique. You know, things that used to be just magical or a mystery to us in the 90s, you know, like they figure out a way to play drums fast or scream, you know, loud and go through, you know, all these different variations and different voices and everything. Like, I admire this new scene. They're so technical and it seems effortless. My upbringing, you know, in the 90s, starting playing drums, there was no blast beat technique. There was no double bass drum technique with like the push pull for the grinds or the double strokes for the bass drums. It was just like, all right, you just got to go as hard as you can, you know, and same for vocals, you know, just scream as loud as you can. And that's my upbringing. But I had a point and I forgot.
Well, I was going to say, if I can maybe try to connect the dots there, is that, again, I think it kind of goes back to what we were saying on the other one, where it's not necessarily black and white. There's kind of a gray, and it's sort of existing in the gray where you can appreciate the foundational elements of what you all went through to get where you are now 20 years later, but also understanding and respecting where the scene is kind of at now with the advancements in technology. And I want to say even maybe a thirst for knowledge on it. Like, I don't know.
Here was my point, and I apologize for interrupting. What I was saying, because you were talking about various vocalists, I feel like vocalists nowadays, like the 20-something-year-olds, they can do all of that, and it's awesome. But for us, I feel like it's part of our creative personality. It's part of our identity, just being a 6-piece, having 2 vocalists. And back then, you know, the intent was, you know, we're all in metal bands prior to Despised Icon, all in a bunch of various death metal bands from the local Montreal scene. And then starting Despised Icon in 2001 and then writing the first record and all that, like the goal was to do something different so that it's refreshing, not only for us as creative beings and as musicians, but also to the listener out there. So that's why we try to merge death metal and hardcore. And on our very first t-shirt that we put out that we sold on our very first show, we wrote Despised Icon Montreal Deathcore. And in 2002, nobody was using that term. And that was the intent with having 2 vocalists, you know, one that's more of a, let's say, Hatebreed, Biohazard, Madball, that'd be me. And then Steve being more of the like Frank Mullen, Suffocation, Devourment, Dying Fetus, you know, and just trying to merge both together, because back then death metal was a lot of fast, heavy shit and not a lot of like, I mean, there was some groove obviously, but we wanted to add more and just merge these different elements that you weren't used to hearing together. And here we are.
You know, kind of talking about that, you know, it's been interesting on this show, you know, having like James from 18 Visions and Brandon from Bleeding Through and some of these bands from more of the beginnings of metalcore as it became known now, and kind of the differences in style. You know, you bring up a band like Madball, you bring up Hatebreeds and stuff like that. talking about the geographical differences in the sound that would ultimately become lumped under one scene. You talk about putting on the shirt, deathcore, and that was something that no one really used the term of or coined at the time. How does it feel looking back to just kind of remember playing your first couple shows and probably just like, I don't want to say being ahead of the curve, but just kind of throwing people a curve ball where they're just like, what? I don't like, because back then shit was separated. It's like, I like death metal or I like hardcore. And I don't think there was much crossover at the time where people like, I like both equally. So what were kind of the reactions initially when you're, playing this new style, quote unquote, new style at the time and coining a new term? How was it received? How do you remember it being received all these years later?
It was very polarizing, people tend to be persistent to change. So when they see or hear something that's threatening, something that they're used to experiencing, some people will view it as refreshing and new and so exhilarating, and others will be like, no, this is not how it's done. This is not how it should sound. And so we either had like fans and people that really supported us at first, and then on the opposite end, especially touring America for the first time. So our first US tours were 2005, 2006. Here we were, touring with Deicide, Skinless, Immolation, Morbid Angel, Suffocation, Cryptopsy, Aborted, traditional death metal bands that weren't deathcore bands, and us being the opening act or very low on the bill, playing to those fans with obituary shirts and everything. Like we would get booed. We would get flipped off and everything. And I was like, I love Obituary. I love Suffocation. I love Cryptopsy. We're touring with Deicide right now. It's our first US tour. This is sick. Once Upon the Cross, awesome. And like, but a lot of them just didn't get it. But then again, that didn't matter. We're a Canadian band. We're francophones. We're part of the French-speaking minority of Canada, and especially back then, none of us ever got the opportunity to tour America. That's like making it. You guys are Americans. You're just used to playing shows in America, but for us, it's like an achievement. And it's complicated. It's work visas. It's like U.S. booking agents. It's like another realm that we're that's not as developed here in Canada. For us, like the major cities to play, you'll see a North American tour. You'll see Montreal and Toronto. Sometimes that's it. Sometimes it's just Toronto. Once in a while, you'll have a Vancouver, an Alberta, or an Edmonton, and that's it. Not even Ottawa, not even Quebec City. Those are like almost B markets, which is super weird for a country that's just as big as yours. So us touring America it was awesome. So if people didn't get it, it didn't matter. We were on the road doing what we loved, and we were on a mission to just play this new type of music. And I don't want to give us all the credit, because I love a band from Massachusetts or from New England called the Red Chord, which for me are one of the first as well, And I say we used the term deathcore in 2002. First time I heard the term deathcore was from a band from, I think, Rochester, New York, called Malamore. They were using that term a year or two before they get no credit. You go on Wikipedia, you don't see Malamore under deathcore. You see, Antagony, All Shall Perish, Despised Icon. But, I don't want to take all the credit. A lot of our peers, have made this scene the way that it is, but those first tours were hard because we were touring in the death metal circuit. And then in 2007, that is the key year for us. These bands started popping off: Job for a Cowboy, Suicide Silence, Animosity, All Shall Perish, and so on and so forth. And next thing you knew, we were touring in a new scene, Through the Eyes of the Dead, another great example, and playing with those younger bands instead that were our age. And it was something new. It was awesome. And next thing you know, we weren't playing in front of like the Cannibal Corpse fan. We love Cannibal Corpse, don't get me wrong. We were playing in front of a Despised Icon fan, or an Animosity fan, or an All Shall Perish fan, and that was sick because they got it. And then, yeah, those were the wonder years, man. And what's cool is everybody at first saw it as a trend.
Yeah.
This isn't gonna last. And then the purists were, hating it, and you'd go on Lambgoat and every band would get destroyed. And
Still do.
and then beginning of yeah, they still do. We still do. And then in 2010, I feel as though like the beginning of the 2010s, I feel like deathcore hit a all-time low. And lately, in the past 3-4 years or so, there's a resurgence, and now it's bigger than ever. And now the style is here to stay. It's not a trend. It's not hype. It's just a type of music, and I love it. And I'm proud of bands like our friends in Whitechapel or Thy Art Is Murder and so on and so forth for sticking to it and being humongous, and Lorna Shore nowadays, and Brand of Sacrifice, and our friends in Shadow of Intent, and just bringing it to the next level. We're a vacation band now. We play a show here and there. We put out a record every 3 or 4 years, and we've experienced what we wanted to experience. Everything is bonus right now. But like these bands out there continuously grinding, like Whitechapel, for instance, I have so much respect for them. We took like 5 or 6 years off, stopped touring. And ever since we've been back, I don't know if we've even played 100 shows, but they've kept to it, and it's awesome. It's just fun to be part of.
Well, I think like the interesting thing is you're saying that and kind of going back, down memory lane of the scene and kind of the beginnings of it and the foundations and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
It's a couple of things to that. It's always interesting kind of looking back, like with, I don't want to say revisionist history at times, but it's interesting because I remember when a lot of the deathcore scene started, it was kind of metalcore had already kind of started taking off, but it's interesting on a few notes for your band specifically, because I remember you were one of the first bands that was touted as deathcore. That was kind of the flag bearers of the scene at the time. And I remember at the time making the comment to someone, I go, why are all the most experimental fucking bands coming out of Canada? I was like, at that time in the early 2000s, I was big on Billy Talent. I was big on, Alexis on Fire had just come out, a couple of years prior. And I was like, all these Canadian bands, and you can even go back to like Rush and stuff like that, they're able to combine all these different influences and make something new for themselves. And Canadian bands have been doing that. International bands have been doing that for so long. And I was like, it seems like for as much as people want to break in America first, I always feel like it's so funny that America is such a benchmark for making it to be successful in touring. And I understand it's a lot easier to tour in the States because you're not having to go through, the differences of changing money and exchanges and all these other things like you do when you're traveling abroad. But it's still interesting to me that there are bands, like a Billy Talent, where, I think so many people look at that band and are like, who the fuck is that? They had like a single in like 2003. And I'm like, if you only knew that the world literally does not revolve around the US and what happens here, that like there's a whole nother world where you can be successful and still maintain a career. I mean, Limp Bizkit is a great example of, they fell off, they're not relevant anymore. And it's like, dude, they're still playing the festivals and all the shows overseas and drawing 10, 15,000 fucking people still. They never went away. They just went where the money fucking was. And to me, it's interesting that so many people have this thought and this concept that like the Americas are the States are the best place to tour, and that's where you're making it. And to me, I feel like if I were to be a band, I'd almost be like, we can conquer the States another time. Let's go to the rest of the world and get that. Because some bands, like you look at a band like Creed, they have the US on lock. Internationally and everywhere else, they were barely a blip on the radar, which is wild to think about, that you could be an arena band and then be nothing everywhere else.
Nobody listens to Creed in Canada. They listen to Nickelback.
Sure.
I don't know. I would tend to disagree just because from an outsider's perspective, as a consumer, most of the bands or movies that we consumed are from America. Most of the bands that we listen to, most of the movies that I see on Netflix or Prime or Disney, they're all made in America. And just speak to any Canadian or European band, and as much as we love our respective countries, that feeling you get when you tour the US for the first time, you're like, holy shit, we're doing it, At least in my book. But like touring the US for a Canadian band, it's It's a lot of paperwork. It's thousands of dollars in visas. It's, a normal treatment period of visas nowadays is like 90 days or something crazy like that. It tends to vary. I've seen anywhere from 30 or 45 days to 90 days. It's complicated. And then, crossing customs, smart thing to do is printing your merchandise in the US, because if you print it in Canada and bring it into the US,
Taxes.
Some border officer is going to tax the shit out of it. And in your early 20s, you don't know anything about that. I remember one of my first times going in America, I was going to be roadie for a band called Ion Dissonance, some of my best friends who were quite active back then. And we figured we'd just go to the US. We had no visas, nothing. They just turned us away. They were like, go home. We're like, we're just literally playing VFWs and floor shows and like underground venues to like 50 kids. Like, why do you even care? I could be making more money on my day job, but we want to do this. But yeah, still to this day, I have that on my record. So if I go to the US, they'll ask you, have you ever been turned away? And then you have to say yes. This one time I said no, and they're like, well, really? It says so right here that you were kicked out of America in 2001 and you lied, and I could tell you to go back in your country right now. And I'm like, holy fuck, I'm sorry. I have a work visa specifically because of that. I apologize. Let me into your country. I want to play these shows, It's rough.
Well, I guess, and I'll take ownership on my end where, I love being challenged on things. Like, I form my opinions on things based on conversations I have and just, observing things. But I also like being challenged. So like the fact that my perspective has always been, as someone who loves music from all over, the era you're talking about as well, when you guys came out, that was the era of import CDs and like having to like hopefully not get ripped off and getting just a fucking burnt copy of the CD you were trying to get that's not available here in the States. And it was just one of those things that, like, I grew up really enjoying music from all over the world and feeling that a lot of the bands that I was into were so much more adventurous than the bands I was finding here. It's like we were, always kind of emulating the bands that we liked. If you look at, even to me, and I know a lot of these bands have said this, but it's like you look at a lot of the early metalcore stuff and everyone's like, dude, we were just ripping off At the Gates.
Yeah, I remember that era. The Swedish sound or whatever. Hey, we're playing with At the Gates in like a week.
Weekend. Or yeah,
in Manchester, and they're playing Slaughter of the Soul. So that is actually sick. But yeah, I do remember like a lot of like the early metalcore bands. They had that melodic sound, but with breakdowns, sort of like a Dark Tranquility with breakdowns, or At the Gates with breakdowns and everything. And part of me, the charm to discovering the Black Dahlia Murder with Unhaloed was that it had that sound, but with blast beats instead of the fast beat. Hey, it's cool. It's fun to be influenced by all sorts of various countries and music and everything. It's just fun to be part of the culture and making it your own. That's the beauty of metal or music in general. You could study it and everything, but deep down there are no rules to this shit. Just do what you want. It's called creativity. It's awesome. And it's fun to like take some of your influences from here and some of your influences from there, and then try to combine it, even though at first it's like, it doesn't work. Just make it work. Otherwise you just sound like everyone else.
This might be a very weird question. I'm sure there were songs that you were working on when Despised Icon started that maybe were demos that never became anything, or recorded at least. Do you remember the first couple of songs you wrote when you were trying to combine, these kind of styles and maybe hadn't quite figured it out as a young baby band?
Every single song we recorded, we put out. Some of them are better than others, but actually, we're releasing this Rarities EP tomorrow called Déterré on Nuclear Blast Records. And the very last recordings that aren't out there are on that actual EP. So we're talking about the first two demo songs that we recorded in 2004 with the, let's say, current lineup of me on vocals and Alex Grind on drums. That was a very exhilarating era of our band, because here we were trying to mesh these two types of music together even more. And like, those were the first songs we uploaded to MySpace and sent out the labels, through burnt CDRs and hand assembled promo sleeves. And those are the songs that got us noticed, So I'm happy that we're actually putting out those songs now. And same for like the 3 other songs on that EP are from a split CD we recorded on Relapse Records in 2005, which sold out that very same year. So those recordings weren't available to the wide public in like, I don't know, 10, 15 years or so. So that's pretty cool. But as far as like any actual songs that never made it out, no, they're all out there.
It's always interesting because sometimes I feel like when bands start, there's the songs you write, there's the songs you perform when you're playing live. And then when it comes time to, get your first, recording studio time, sometimes you have already written newer stuff. So like the first couple of songs that you literally started with, you're like, these aren't it anymore. let's do like the new stuff because we're pumped about that. And it actually sounds like what we're trying to do. So it's kind of just more of the, maybe remembering like literally the first like song or two or a couple that you were writing as the band that maybe didn't get recorded. But it sounds like, you literally are one of the few bands that didn't go through that phase where it was like, yeah, we had songs and we played them live and they existed, but like they've never been recorded.
Oh, well, don't get me wrong. I do have the same feeling that you just described on a whole bunch of Despised Icon and Obey the Brave songs, my previous project, but we still put them out, But that's the beauty of it, whether we talk about Obey the Brave, which was a metalcore band I was in on Epitaph Records. We had 4 records. Here we are with Despised Icon working on our 7th record. So the beauty of it is, and us, being 20 years old this year, which is amazing. The beauty of it is just, you don't have to play the songs you don't like anymore. We have so many to choose from, Here we are playing an hour-long headlining set, probably like an hour plus long, and we're barely playing 2 songs per record. We're literally, all right, every record and playing our favorite songs off of those. And every other song, they exist. Some people listen to them. We like playing them once in a while, but we just play the hits or the songs that are very personal to us, specifically. So
it's interesting. It's interesting, actually, you bring up playing an hour and playing, the hits. I went and saw Knock Loose again for, I don't know how many times I've seen them at this point, but they were touring with Bring Me like at a shed. And I've seen Knock Loose since basically they were being like the first of 4 on like the Acacia Strain tours and stuff. So to see the growth and just seeing like how they progressed over the last, 6-7 years or so has been like shocking. And I remember thinking to myself, because I saw them headline the Intersection here in Grand Rapids, an 1800 cap room. And I was like, wow, like they fucking did it and it translates. But I was interested to see, does it translate when you go to the next level? When you now be like the barrier's a little bit further away, like you're having to deal with people all the way on the fucking lawn. Like, does the show translate at that stage? And it was crazy because as soon as the lights went down and it was time to go, like we were in a separated pit area, like in front of the stage. But I was shocked to see that it still felt like a hardcore show, even in a shed, that they were able to translate what they do to something that big. But also it's interesting, they're only a couple of records in at this point, that even still, like, I heard people like, oh, they better play this. They better play this. And like, damn, they're 2 fucking records and an EP into their career. And you already have people who are like, they better play this. And it really kind of made me realize that, like, even though this genre is kind of, for lack of a better term, doesn't have hits, they have hits, and you're still expected to play certain songs. And it's wild to think that even at that point of their career, they're already like, you better play half of Laugh Tracks and you better play half of, A Shade of Blue. And, well, you better start playing like these 2 or 3 off of this EP. And it's like, well, fuck, that's whole set now. And I may not get to play a deep cut anymore because like, this is what's expected of me now.
Yeah. I mean, my perspective on all that is just achieving that balance. At some point you have to recognize that you are nothing without the people that support you. And those people have expectations or they want to hear a specific song. So just play that song, please the crowd. But at the end of the day, if you're not happy playing or touring or playing these shows, then what's the purpose in the first place? So for this, as far as Despised Icon is concerned, it's always, playing some of the popular songs, but also here and there adding a song called Retina, which is on our second record, which is by far not the most streamed song and by far not the fan favorite. But for us, it's just so much fun to play live, you know? So it's, you know, playing some of these deep cuts here and there so that you could please yourself first and foremost, but you can't ignore the crowd, man. You know, you are doing what you love because of them. So don't forget that. But as far as Knocked Loose is concerned, wow, I've only toured with them once. It was Obey the Brave, Knocked Loose, Malevolence, Comeback Kid. It was a small European tour, and I forget the year that was, probably 2018 or something like that. And if it were nowadays, Knocked Loose would be headlining, and by far. And it's so impressive to see that band's growth. But they've definitely worked hard for it, and they write 6 songs. I actually went and saw them live for the first time since that tour. They were touring with, they were headlining with Terror and Dying Fetus, and I love bills like that. You know, for Despised Icon, we always do mixed bills like that. You know, so one of my favorite lineups that we put together was for the Day of Mourning tour in Canada. It was Despised Icon. It was Cryptopsy, a brutal death metal band. It was the Acacia Strain. It was Trapped Under Ice. You know, all over the place. Our last U.S. headliner, you know, we had Kublai Khan as direct support, and then we had Shadow of Intent opening. You know, such a mixed bill. I love the mixture of hardcore and death metal at shows, and not just being a, you know, typecast deathcore bill or a typecast death metal bill. I love the variety and mixed crowds. You know, that's how our band started out. Yeah.
Today's Beer Minute is brought to you by Starving Artist Brewery, who share a simple belief you should judge beer and not people. Today's beer is from Martin House Brewing out of San Antonio, Texas. It's their Delilah Cran Raspberry Sour. Coming in at 10%, this sour offers something a little out of the norm for a Martin House sour: no lactose. Even with a higher ABV, this is a surprisingly drinkable sour with a more fruit-forward flavor and no real pronounced tart sour bite. This would be a good sour for people who don't think they'd like a sour beer in the first place and could enjoy it for its complexities. Thanks to Starving Artist Brewing, who remind you to support your starving artists, and please, always drink responsibly. And now, back to the show.
Well, I mean, like, it was kind of funny. I realized, like, I'd going to see shows for so long, you know, and having this conversation with a friend the other day, and he was like, oh, you know, are you going to this show? And I was like, I'm going. And he goes, oh, are you going to see the opener? And I was like, no, I don't really like the opener. So I'm just going to go and then get there right when I want to see the bands I want to see. And he's like, oh man, you should go check out the opener. You never know who you're going to see, you know, and how big they'll get. And it was interesting because his point of reference was like, I mean, like, I went and saw Blink-182 and A Day to Remember was opening for them. And I go, dude, that was here and at an arena. And literally A Day to Remember at that point, that was only a few years ago. A Day to Remember was who they are now then. Like, and I go, if you're trying to have a conversation like that, like, dude, the amount of bands I've seen, like, I remember seeing A Day to Remember opening for bands that couldn't even play, like, that played the main room of the Intersection. And they were like the first band and they were not great. And I go, but like, it's been crazy to see their progression. I go, I mean, I do love going to see shows and going to see openers and stuff like that, because it's interesting to see the bands that end up making it, the bands that end up reinvesting in themselves and in their show. And that's something that I think Knocked Loose has done really well, is they've reinvested in themselves, but they also bring up the scene and bring up the bands that they're into, regardless of genre or whatever. And to me, that's what has allowed them to be successful, is that they're doing it right, because they've learned from all of the scene and the peers that took them out and showed them how to do this. And it's one of those that I feel like that's sort of seemingly been lost, where it's all about, let's make as much fucking money as we can, let's do this. And I understand it's a business, but at times I do miss when people would be like, man, fuck it, we're taking out the most wild fucking package tour because we have to tour with it and we want to see these bands, so we're doing something that we want to see. And I feel like Knocked Loose is doing it right, where they're like, yeah, we fuck with Kublai Khan, we fuck with like You're the Knife, we fuck with these bands. And like, not only do they take them out, but I love that, like, you'll see them at these shows too when they're not touring, or like they'll pop in and go see bands. And I love that, because I feel like that also has been lost seemingly, is being supportive of what you're into.
So a few points. Everything you said is true. The thing is, you said you're 38. I'm 42 now. So as we grow older with, let's say perhaps more obligations, and because we've been going to shows since the 90s, at some point, not that you lose that sense of community or that love for the art or anything, but at some point you got to do other things. You got to experience other things in life, and you have these obligations and bills to pay. And so I don't go out to shows as often as I used to, and I'm comfortable with that. But I've also played over 2,000 shows in my lifetime, and I've done it, So, but some of the shows I go to now are local shows with bands you've not heard of, and they're my friends from Montreal, and it's awesome, and it's something that I will never lose sight of. But as far as going to shows all the time, multiple times a week, those days are gone for me. And as far as like not overestimating the opening act, here is a prime example that I think you will enjoy. You mentioned Bring Me the Horizon earlier. So arguably they're humongous, right? They probably play arenas or whatever, like they're huge. Touring in the US with Despised Icon, I believe the lineup was Job for a Cowboy, Despised, Faceless. I forget who else was on that bill. And we show up in Little Rock, Arkansas. And this is summer 07 or summer 08. And there is an opening act that is added to that show that's not on tour with us. And they go by the name of Bring Me the Horizon. And it's their first US tour ever. And I'm not quite familiar with them. But here we are, Job for a Cowboy, who was the biggest band back then. And so we're like, I wonder who these guys are. And then they show up in a tour bus. I'm like, holy fuck, they're in a tour bus. And then they set up their merch, and they didn't, I guess they were super young or shy. They didn't really speak with anyone. Maybe they didn't feel at home because they weren't on our actual lineup, on our tour lineup. But yeah, they played the show. Literally, kids showed up, went completely nuts during their set. Craziest pit of the night. They sold out all of their merchandise, and then they just left. And then I kid you not, like 70% of the people that showed up to that show left. And then it was our actual tour package playing in front of no one. And we were like, what the fuck just happened? and yeah, they're huge. They were huge back then. But yeah, don't underestimate the opening band, and they're a prime example.
It's wild to think about stuff like that because, living here, I was talking to Jim from For the Fallen Dreams a while ago about this actually, but he was like, we took Bring Me Out on like one of their first US runs. And I was like, dude, isn't it wild? Like that, like to talk to some bands where they're like, I remember taking X band out, and like now look at them, or like we did the first couple, like thinking about like the scene as a whole, and like some of the bands like the Dater Members and Bring Me's and some of these other bands. And it's like, yeah, I remember like playing like VFW halls with a Dater Member when no one fucking cared, and we played to like 20 kids and slept on some shit person's like floor the whole package tour, and just things like that.
I've done that. Definitely don't miss that. Yeah, it's wild, but that's a prime example of bands putting in the work. Disregarding any negative comments or press or anything, and just doing their thing. And then, the year we played Summer Slaughter, Whitechapel were first of 10 bands. And I believe 2 years later or something like that, they were headlining Summer Slaughter. Same like, first time Despised toured Australia. There was this small band called Thy Art Is Murder that was opening for us. And now they're like literally the biggest deathcore band ever. And it's just a prime example of bands putting in the work, writing more and more songs, getting out there on the road, and becoming the best that they can be. So, yeah.
I know you kind of touched on this a little bit ago, talking about taking 5-6 years off from touring and just kind of now being a part-time band, does like fly-in dates and so forth, just kind of doing it part-time. And, you mentioned Lorna Shore. Has it been interesting from your perspective to see the viral moments lately of your scene, between Lorna Shore with To the Hellfire, like literally going viral, and then even Kubla Khan having that moment with Kate Beckinsale or whatever. Like, is it interesting to see a scene that that you were a part of and kind of at the foundational beginnings of, where it was kind of like this is a trend, it's this, to then now like seeing it be in these viral mainstream moments? Is it kind of a trip to you to see this all these years later?
I think it's awesome. When Despised played, before originally coming back together, officially coming back together in 2016, we played some reunion shows in America in 2014. And it was like, I think it was only like Massachusetts and New York. And the band that opened for us in New York was Lorna Shore, with original vocalist, original lineup and everything. And I remember just them being friendly, didn't really get to speak much. And then did our co-headline official comeback tour in 2016 with Carnifex, and Lorna Shore were on that lineup supporting as well. And then I was like, oh, that's pretty cool, man. They've come a long way since being that local band 2 years ago. They're actually doing this full US tour now and have some hype. That's great. And now just, fast forward a few years later, and now they're like the biggest band arguably within the genre. And it's so cool to see. And I'm super happy for Austin and the boys. And another example of a band putting in the work and trying to be as creative as possible, and maybe not doing what the trend demands of you, but trying to add in some new spices and ideas here and there. And yeah, I think it's great.
It's one of those that it's interesting to see. It's interesting to see a genre that most people wouldn't even probably remotely dip their toes into listening to, and now all of a sudden, because of a TikTok thing or whatever, like now it's cool and it's catching on, and it's interesting, like to see something like that, because it reminds me kind of like, like one of the bigger bands I can think of that kind of did this, or a couple of bands that kind of did this, like for metalcore when I was getting into that, is it's like, okay, Killswitch with the end of Heartache, and then like, getting sync opportunities in video games and movies and so forth. And it was like
such a good record. I believe there's one song that made it like on a Friday the 13th movie or something.
Darkness Falls.
And,
yep.
Yes, and that's the movie edit has Howard, but without the screaming. I remember that. End of Heartache is a record that Despised Icon really listened to during our early years touring America, just because we were doing so many death metal tours, and for us it was just so refreshing to not hear blast beats or hear these catchy hooks and everything. Yeah, what a record.
But it was wild to see, like, all of a sudden, because of these sync opportunities, people like would be jamming at least that song, and then you're just like, I wouldn't have thought that you'd be into this. Well, I like this one song. Or it's like, this is kind of maybe a blasphemous band to bring up, but I remember when Stained had It's Been a While, and that was like the crossover hit of the decade, basically, at the end of the beginning of the 2000s or whatever. And then I remember thinking to myself, it'll be funny when someone buys the record based off of Outside and It's Been a While, and then you get some of the more aggressive songs that are on that record, and then just being like, someone's like, what the fuck did I just buy?
Not very familiar with Stained. More of an American phenomenon.
Yeah,
but I don't know.
They're like Nickelback. They got some riffs.
When it comes to music in general, I feel like there are a lot of egos, and people sort of like have this persona and they're like too cool for school. And I would like to think that I've always been humble or beyond that. And it's fun to see friends succeed, or people that you meet on the road that you don't care if they're like in a popular band or in a band or not, to begin with. I remember playing in New York City at BB King's for the first time, and just walking on the street close to the venue, and then see these two brothers that just come up to me and they're like, holy shit, do you play in this band? I'm like, hey man, yeah, what's up? First time in America, nice to meet you. And then they hand me a demo, a CDR of their band, and that band was Winds of Plague. And fast forward 2 years later, they signed to Century Media, put out Decimate the Week, I think. And then they were huge, or us, touring Arizona for the first time and sleeping over at this kid's place. And he's like, yeah, I started this new band. We're called Job for a Cowboy. We're starting to play our first shows, blah, blah, blah. And then just, and then just us, going to Arizona 6 months later and meeting up with that kid and like, yo, man, I hear about you guys a bunch now. That's so sick. And just being part of that movement. And I feel like sometimes when you have that attitude or ego or think you're hot shit, you sort of like deprive yourself from those experiences. And so, yeah, be careful how you treat people.
It's funny because I remember, I think it was around my timing might be wrong because my friend Frank tours a bunch between his old band and then tour managing and stuff like that. So my concept of years is probably wrong. Finelli.
Oh, I love Frank.
Exactly. Yeah. Good
he used
friend.
to be in the world. He used to play in the World We Knew.
Yep.
And they were the opening band on this one tour we did with like Winds of Plague, For Today, Despised, I forget who else. And yeah, they were the opening act. And now their guitar player, Tim, plays in Fit for an Autopsy. Huge band. That's sick. I love Frank. He's been, I saw on social media, he's just been on the road for like 3 consecutive months. I don't know how he does it.
Yeah, we actually, I got to see him for the first time since the World We Knew reunion show in Long Island. My wife and I decided to go surprise Frank and go to the show, which he was shocked because it's funny. I'm originally from the East Coast, but I live in Michigan. So there's been a couple of times we've gone back east and surprised Frank, and he's always like, it's so weird you're here because I just think of you as Midwest. Like, you're in the Midwest. You don't exist anywhere else other than the Midwest. So the fact that you're out here on the East Coast is kind of fucking with me. But I just got to see him the other day or a couple weeks ago when he was on that In This Moment run doing merch, which that spread was insane. And I don't envy him having to haul and set up all of that. It was like a goddamn festival setup. Like
he's doing what he loves though. Like one thing about Frank is like, you're talking about Midwest and East Coast and all that. My perception of Frank is that guy has no home. He just lives on the road and he's all about it. He's all about it and he's doing what he loves and he's doing that vintage rock tees as of late and it's doing well. So it's fun to see people like that you've met in 06 or whatever. And then that, they're still somehow about that life. And as you get older, a lot of people that you've toured with or shared the stage with or would see at shows, for them it was just a phase. It was just like a year and a half to 3 years out of their lives, and then they sort of went elsewhere, and that's okay too. But I like seeing diehards like Frank or myself, I would like to think, and seeing how long how far we've gone. And yeah.
Well, I was going to use Frank as an interesting transition, but I was going to say, I remember he came up and did vocals with you guys at a show. I think it was during one of your reunion shows or shortly thereafter. He came up and did a song with you guys where you were somewhere. I don't remember where, maybe even at a European festival. Because I know he was with the Browning.
He was doing merch for Amur. He did Amur for quite some time. And I feel like we played a few festivals with Amur. And I was like, yo, Frank, sick. We get to tour, buddy. And then, yo, do you want to do MVP? And he was like, sure.
But I was going to say, like, he is somebody who is the embodiment of adapting and figuring shit out. I've had him on the show a couple of times and his story is just incredible of like, I did a tour when I was in high school. I realized this is what I wanted to do and I fucking dropped out and I didn't have a backup plan, to even talking about then, kind of the revert, like real quick story for those that maybe don't know who Frank is. Talking about then, doing the World We Knew, we got pretty far, got signed to Josta's label, did some decent tours, but it just wasn't working out. Band's going to break up. And then he gets offered to go TM for Bam Margera, making more money than he ever did touring in the World We Knew. And then that started the TMing career and doing merch and lights and all this other stuff. And he's just always hustled and always figured out a way and always figured out how to make it and put his all into everything he does. Like, he is someone who motivates the hell out of me seeing him change and adapt to whatever situation he's put into. And he complains, but I would say he never complains. He complains a lot. But he complains because he understands that like he's still blessed and he gets to do all these things that a lot of people wouldn't because they would have quit, and he doesn't.
Bottom line is nothing worth having comes easy. And we learn through our experiences and we get better through those experiences. And in order to do so, you got to fuck up plenty of times, and that will be a test of character, a test of dedication, a test of your passion and your craft. But the more you do it, the better you get at it. The better you are at it. And one, probably some aspiring musicians or people that are starting bands for the first time or watching or listening to your podcast, and you're going to write a shitty song. You're not going to be good at drums at first. Your vocals are going to suck for the first couple of shows or tours or whatever, but that's how you learn. That's how you get better. So don't let it discourage you, And if you do something that, we're, again, to talk about Frank, he did his band. It didn't work out, but it generated new opportunities and whatnot. And he did his clothing line, which had some hype, and that brought him to Warped Tour. And at the end of the day, I think his clothing line didn't, stand the test of time, but that got him on Warped Tour. And then he met all of these contacts, and now he's doing these stadium tours and selling these vintage tees for like $500. And, he owns his craft, and he's like a prime example of dedication, and voila. Yo, Frank, what's up, bud? Hit me up.
But the reason I was going to bring up Frank is because, as you were talking, and I'd be remiss, obviously, with the name of the show, you getting into a different business venture sort of outside of being in a band, but I think actually is one that is pretty similar as far as, I think starting a brewery and starting to work in beer, I think a lot of people probably don't realize how much it sort of is like a band, because you have to put out releases every so often. You have your mainstays that become the hits that people are expecting when they go. You have to think about branding. You got to think about your content you're doing. And it's kind of very similar to kind of being in a band. What got you into that realm and that world, and how has it been for you?
For sure. Well, for starters, I can't take all the credit because we are a team of more or less 40 employees. We've been at it for a little over 3 years. I joined the brewery 3 months in after they opened. But yes, prior to being a service manager at Messorem, Messorem, that's how it's spelled. I was managing bands. So I got to apply some of that knowledge and understanding to managing a service team, everybody, the bus crew, people behind the bar, helping out with the kitchen, all that. I understood, what the business model was and how to apply my music industry knowledge somewhat to, a microbrewery setting. But, I'm not going to lie, a lot of trial and error, a lot of fuck ups at first, and just learning and absorbing and just being curious. As long as you have that curiosity and that willingness to learn, you could achieve anything. So that's been my outlook for these past 3 years. I will be celebrating my 3rd year with the brewery in December. It's cool. I mean, luckily speaking, we are amongst the best in Canada, or the most recognized in Canada. But all of that was achieved through a lot of hard work, a lot of trial and error, releasing 3 to 5 beers every week. Damn. Like a steady grind. Like it's been hard with the pandemic. Canada had huge restrictive measures. All 3 lockdowns all put together. Our tap room was closed for 11 months, and the only way that we kept afloat and even managed to get better is through steady releases every week, regardless, selling those 4-packs, selling those bottles, crafting good beer, interacting with our audience, giving them a good variety, a good quality of product, and a good quality of service. That's my expertise. And here we are now, but it's been hectic, man. Like these past 5 months, spring, summer, and beginning of fall, I've been working overtime, I don't know, anywhere from 50 to 60 hours a week. 60 years a week, man. It's wild.
Oh my God. You got some Benjamin Button shit going on over there.
But part of that was just the brewery being so young and coming up with these procedures as we go along, as we are living these experiences and these turnouts. And, anytime there's a rush on a good day, it's 250 people all at once in the tap room or terrace. So it's a lot to manage. and through a better understanding of our clientele, the business, and everything, I think I'm at a point now where I'm going to be able to reduce my hours and delegate as well. I have 2 assistant managers now who are going to help me out during this next month, being away for the first time and me going back on tour for the first time in 3 years. And it's very exciting, man. If you're ever in Montreal, you should pay us a visit.
Definitely. It's funny because so in the last year and a half or so, I got back into the service industry. I was working door at a dive bar here in town. And then for a multitude of reasons, ended up leaving that and then went to the New Holland Brewing right next door to us across the street. And it's been interesting because New Holland just celebrated its 25th year, but it's still independently owned. Like the people who started it still own it. So it is still at this point, I think, the largest independent brewery in the US as far as like its reach and distribution and all that. But it's been interesting to kind of get back into the service industry in this capacity where their whole thing is like you work your way up from literally hosting and doing all this stuff. And it's been a real interesting, I don't want to say a test of patience, but it's been a real interesting process for me because as someone who has over 10 years of like retail and food management experience, it's funny to talk to someone who this is like their first job and they're like 20 years younger than me. And I'll try to offer some advice and be like, hey, maybe you might want to try doing this, or hey, you might. And then they're just like, no, I know what I'm doing. And you're like, okay. Like it's a little bit of humble pie a little bit at times where you're just like, all right. But also learning to teach you something.
It's just figuring out the right words to get that point across, Communication is key. Whether you're in a band or in a brewery, you got to be able to give out that positive reinforcement and, yo, guys, this was awesome. Great job on doing that. But when it comes to improving stuff, figuring out a proper way to, get that point across, not be like, you fucked up, you suck. This is a no-no. Just be like, how about we work on this next, And they call it a sandwich. It's like compliment, this sucks, improve this, and then compliment. Sandwiches.
It's funny. I was telling someone the other day, because even on the podcast, like I was talking to a front woman of the Bobby Lees, and she was talking about the impetus of what their new record was about lyrically and what started it. And it was kind of like a breakdown that she had. And she was talking about it. And I was like, I wouldn't look at it as a breakdown. I'd look at it as a breakthrough. Cause like, it's the spark that changed all the things where you knew you needed to change and improve your life. So I wouldn't call that a breakdown. I think we tend to focus on the wrong phrasing. We tend to focus on negative things first instead of positive. So, like you're saying, the sandwich. And I go, it's funny. I used to hate this when I worked at Sam's Club, and especially as management, they just drilled it into us at all times. It's not a mistake. It's an area of opportunity to grow and learn. As I get older, I like it now because I'm like, that does make sense. And it's a good way to look at it because it doesn't make it negative like most people would focus on. And I go, but I used to have to do these one-on-ones with different departments and so forth. And they wanted you to do them in like 5 to 8 minutes. They were like 5 to 8 minutes, you're done. And I go, in 5 to 8 minutes, all I'm basically telling someone, if they are not doing their job well from the week before, all I'm showing them is a sheet of paper with these metrics on it. And it's like, you suck, you suck, you suck, you suck, you suck. Okay, go be better. Bye. That's basically all the time you're giving me to do something. And I go, that's not going to motivate anybody. No. And they would make fun of me for spending 45 minutes in some cases with people. And I go, but then look at my results. The next week, that person was like now pushing out more credit card applications than the best person we had. I go, you got to learn how to talk and communicate with people and how to motivate them. Not everyone is like a fucking textbook. You can't just one thing applies to everyone and on your way. Like you can't do that.
For me personally, it's, some group chats and me speaking to the team as a whole, but a lot of one-on-one as well, a lot of private conversations. And the bigger the brewery becomes, the bigger the service team gets. And I find myself being in a pattern now where, probably 30% of my job is just having these discussions and just making sure that everybody follows a certain pace and yeah, at times I don't feel like having these conversations, but it is what it is, man. And sometimes all all it requires is one conversation with one employee, and then they get it. And then for other people, it's just constant reminders.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are like steady, and then some people are just all over the place. And you need to know how to navigate with that, and not necessarily quit on them as well, because sometimes the people that were the most problematic in the end, you know, because of the amount of loyalty that we've shown them, and the amount of time and effort that we put into these conversations and positive reinforcement, and we do it because we love them and because we appreciate them as human beings. That's sort of like, you know what, they recognize my value here, and I am part of a family, and I want to excel now. And some of my best employees are those problem childs that were there at first. So it's you got to give them a chance. Nobody's the same way. You know, some people require more work, but that doesn't mean that the outcome is that they're constantly going to be a fuck up. They have that potential, just as much.
What this is interesting, because you said that, like, if my timeline's correct, you know, you pandemic basically, so you didn't really play any shows then that I'm aware of. So this is the first time you're really leaving to go do, you know, your old thing. How has the reaction been to some of the people who probably had no idea that you were in a band, and then probably when someone's like, oh, well, he's leaving. Oh, where's he going? On tour or playing in a band? And then, like, maybe they'll Spotify you or whatever, and they're just like, have you gotten some interesting, like, damn, dude, I didn't know, like, you did this thing for as long as you have, or that you were in a band like this and did all that you have?
When I'm in my work environment or at the brewery or anything, I don't tend to speak about myself as a musician or a touring musician or as a recording artist. I don't know. I'm just focused on the task and what my job is. And so some people, they figure it out like 6 months later and like, holy shit, why didn't you tell me this? And then other people, they recognize me from the get-go and they're like, holy shit, that's you. And I'm like, yeah, so what?
I just think it's an interesting cross-section of the compartmentalization of us as people, because you're at work and that's your focus is work. Mm-hmm. But there is potential for some of your other part of your work life to come into it, where people are probably going to be like, oh, I didn't know like that you did this, or that this was something. And I've had it very far and few between doing, like, working at the brewery, like I was saying, where where I've had someone that was like, hey, you're that guy from the podcast. And then and I don't talk about it at work, but then all of a sudden the next thing you know, I had a bunch of people like that night when we were rolling silverware and shit. And they're like, so you have a podcast? What's it about? And I'm like, don't listen to it. It's fine.
One of the funniest memes I've seen recently is like, it's like something like an office conversation, and they're like, "Oh, you're in a band. You should do a scream," or like, "Hey, I want to join a band. Cool if I play triangle, and like I'll play the tambourine." And then it's the face. It's awesome. It's not really funny the way I'm.
No, but I mean, I get it. Because adversely, I get that with this, where people are like, I'd be a really great guest on a podcast, and I'm like, okay. Like, what do you want? What do you want me to do with that? Like, and then it's like, I don't have the heart to be like, I mean, I think everyone's interesting, but also this is kind of, it has to fit sort of the crux of this show, what it's becoming. You either have to be a musician, or kind of musician or beer sort of adjacent at this point to kind of make it make sense. Unless I'm just like super into it.
For all the beer lovers and for yourself, in case you're curious, so Masorum, our specialty are like New England style IPAs, so like super hazy, some bitter, some juicy, some are a balance of both. We do a lot of wild ales. For Halloween, we're launching 2 pastry stouts, you know.
Ooh,
all over the place. We do smoothie sours, we do slushies with alcohol. So any of our American friends listening at home, look us up on Untapped, Masorum, and hey, pay me a visit if you're ever there. Just ask for me at the bar. I'll come say hi. The way this whole venture started out for me personally is just, I was touring full-time, alternating between Obey the Brave and Despised Icon. And then I got back from like a consecutive 2 months, you know, spreading across North America and Europe, Despised, OTB back to back, show up at home exhausted. And like, just me being like, I'm going to be 40 soon. I don't want to be touring 6 months out of the year anymore. Just like, who am I? What am I, you know, I need to experience something different. I need to know what it's like to actually live in Montreal and not just always be here today, gone tomorrow. And curiously enough, me going through that mental blockage or whatever, my friend hits me up, FaceTimes me at like midnight, just, hey, how was the tour? And I'm like, fuck, man, I'm exhausted. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. He's like, why don't you come and work with us at the brewery? I'm like, no, I don't need any charity work or whatever. Like, it's cool. I got this. And then the next day, one of the other partners from Masorum, Sebastian, he's like, he hits me up. He's like, so you're coming to work with us this week? And I'm just like, fuck it. Let me try it out. Let me do something different for a change instead of always being in that comfort zone. What am I used to? Playing shows, recording music. Let me do something completely different and apply myself and just see where it goes. And it was very frightening at first, you know, sort of like starting over that late in the game and trying something new. But ultimately it worked out. And I was with the right people to do so as well. These are people that have known me forever. Sebastian used to play in a band called Ion Dissonance. Fidion, the other partner, used to tour with Obey the Brave, did merch designs for Despised Icon. You know, like, they get me. They know my strengths and weaknesses and saw me in that setting and gave me that opportunity. And at first I was just helping out, you know, with the production team, canning line. I was like, boys, this is way too physical for me. They're like, all right, you know what? You be a busboy then. I was like, all right, fuck it. I'll just do that. And then one thing led to another. A month later, somebody at the bar quits. Hey, Alex, do you want to work the bar? Sure. I've never done that. I'll try it out. And then brewery got bigger. And then a few months later, it's like, yo, man, we need all this staff. It's just so much to handle. Can you manage the service team? And I was like, never done that before. I've managed a bunch of bands. Let me give it a go. And then always just baby steps, incremental, you know, progress. And just, it's easy to get overwhelmed by the big picture and being frightened and just quitting. But when you try and focus one little thing at a time, next thing you know, you blink, you wake up 3 years later and holy shit, I'm actually doing it, you know? So yeah, I don't even know why I'm saying that, but I'm sure some of your
proud. Because you're proud. You're proud of stepping out of your comfort zone and learning something new, especially, I don't mean to say it like this, but especially later in life when a lot of people are like, you know, I've had those thoughts with things in recent years where I'm like, I'm this age, I like, what the fuck am I doing? Blank, you know, whatever. And, you know, I think those of us that have chosen to kind of go a more abstract route in our lives and our careers, if you can call them that, is this thing of, we know who we are and we know that, you know, some things, I don't want to say it's self-doubt. I think it's just I think when you kind of hit this point, like, you kind of have to realize that doing some things, it may not be sustainable for forever. So you have to kind of look at something and go, okay, like, now what? Now what's the next thing? And can I do this? And yeah, it might be a challenge, or it might be whatever, and it's scary and it's daunting and it's all these things. But, you know, as you were saying all those things, like, I'm literally going through those right now at the brewery I'm working at, where it's like, yeah, I'm having to bus. Can I do well more than bus? Fuck yeah. But you know what? On my busing shifts, I'm like, be the best fucking busser they got.
Hell yeah.
I'm going to be the best fucking bus they got.
Take pride in what you do. There's there's a saying in French. I don't want to butcher it, but like, yeah, whatever you do, it just apply yourself. And also nowadays with, you know, economy, financial insecurities, it's you want to feel safe and everything. And I've sort of blessed myself in the fact that I sort of like disregarded all that and just did what I loved. And so at first it meant music, and I had no idea I was going to be in a touring band or actually put out music. I'm still like in the underground metal. I'm not Lamb of God or Slipknot or any of that, but I'm happy with the level of success that we've achieved. And that wasn't the goal. It's just, I really loved music. And so I played music, and this is where it got me. And same for the brewery, you know, I was like, holy shit, I'm working with friends. This is actually fun. I don't know if this is going to be my career. I'm doing it right now and it feels good.
Yeah.
And here I am 3 years later and it still feels great. It's a lot of hard work. Sometimes you get burnt, but in the grand scheme of things, I am happy. And I didn't think I was going to be a service manager, but I am, and I get to do my own schedule and hire people that I think are like-minded, and no, it's cool. So sometimes just go with the flow and just apply yourself. And if that has to be your branch, then so be it. But don't just do something for the sake of being safe.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
100% it does. And, I think it's a good place to leave off, because I know I saw probably your partner behind you and all that.
Dude, check this out. I leave for the airport in an hour. I need to pack my shit. Like, I'm still got my jerseys.
There you go. I got one last question for you, and it's kind of a cheap plug for my sponsor, but
I think this is what I've been hiding this whole time. I need to fold my shit. Okay, I'm listening.
So, podcast sponsor is Rockabilly. They do merch. They have band merch and all that kind of stuff. So a fun segment I came up with a couple, like last week, that I started yesterday, actually, with Stefan from Chelsea Grin. What is your favorite piece of band merch? Could be old, could be new, could have been when you were a kid and the first show you went to. What is like one of your favorite pieces of merch?
It has to be just one?
I mean, you could do a couple if you want. Like Steven was like, it's my Demibor gear, Misanthropic, or whatever the fuck that album title is. I can never get it right. But the one with the chick with the barbed wire and her boobs out, like that album cover. He was like, that one is tight. And then he went on about some other merch.
I'm more of a blank tee type of guy. I like Carhartt or Champion. Just it's kind of.
Is that why you're
quality?
The Carhartt hoodies and the package, the bundle package for the album.
Yeah, I like to spend more on quality. So I'm just going to show you a few. Let's say big influence right here: Suffocation, Effigy of the Forgotten, one of the greatest death metal bands of all time. If not, here I got this. Biohazard,
oh my god, I've been wanting to get
Discipline.
That shirt so much lately. I've been trying to get one of the originals. Dope. Yeah,
I'm more of a state of the world address type of guy, but this record is still badass.
Dude, Punishment goes so hard.
I got this Death Symbolic from Relapse, and then hold on. Okay, Madball, set it off here. I got an Obituary shirt. Okay, I'm going to leave you with one last shirt. So this is pretty cool, okay? So
Cavalera
this is a Cavalera shirt, a Cavalera Conspiracy, but it's a mashup of the Beneath the Remains and Arise album covers, and they used the original Sepultura logo to do the Cavalera logo. So this one is actually pretty sick.
So sweet.
Voila.
Yeah. That's awesome. Those are some heavy hitters right there. Mainly the Biohazard. I'm really jealous of that Biohazard.
Chills from the hot side.
Dude, I can't wait for them to reunite with the original lineup. I didn't think that was going to happen.
I saw that, and then I went on. I'm more of an Apple Music type of guy, and then going on the Biohazard Apple Music page, and then top one most streamed song is the song they did with Onyx from the Judgment Night soundtrack.
Yeah.
Holy shit, that brings me back.
Yeah, dude, I had the rush of nostalgia that hit me the other day because I was supposed to do a chat with somebody, and they didn't end up showing up, but I was buying the Botch reunion tickets right as we were supposed to start, and I was like, it's gonna be so fucking awkward. This dude's gonna come in and be like, hold on, I'm buying Botch tickets real quick, like, can you just hold on while I 20-year-old me is like, oh my god, I literally never thought I'd get to see this band because they broke up when I got into them, and now I'm like, I gotta buy tickets, I gotta go to Seattle, I gotta go see this band with a bunch of other 40 to 50-year-old men or people crammed into a 1,000 cap room, reliving our youth.
I'm not so much a Botch type of guy. Maybe a Dillinger Escape Plan, Calculating Infinity. I think they're sort of considered in the same scene. Are they? I'm not even sure.
Sort of. I mean, Botch was one of those things
Are they Burnt by the Sun? No.
So it's kind of tough because to me, they were kind of in the beginning of they're kind of one of those bands, and people listening are probably like, that's not what they sound like. But to me, at the time when I got into them, it was sort of around the same time of like the New England wave of heavy metal. So it's like it encompassed everything from like chaotic, like hardcore, but then had like kind of indie kind of like leanings inside. Like it just, I don't know, they just were who they were, and it sounded like other bands that I was listening to, but also sounded like nothing I was listening to, because the bands I would reference, it's like, but they don't do this, so it sounds nothing like them. They were fucking cool. And it was at a time where I started coming up here to Grand Rapids to go see shows. I befriended a lot of local musicians and local bands, and all of those dudes were super into botch. And
that's why you know Jim from For the Fallen Dreams.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're good. But like, and it's one of those things, like, to me, it's like, the band is really good. I never got to see them. And like, I know it'll be weird because like, I don't have any memories of seeing them previously, but it's one of those where it's like, it'll kind of hit that nostalgic tip for me of being like, man, if it wasn't for these people and coming to this city when I was a kid, going like being in a small town city an hour away, like I wouldn't know about this music. I wouldn't know about these people. I wouldn't have these friendships. I wouldn't have moved here. Like, I wouldn't have met my wife, like, you know, just, and I don't want to say it's all because of botch, but it's like, that's kind of what's encompassing it for me, is it's like so much of who I became was because of learning about a band like botch. And then all the other bands that I found through that.
That's the magic of music and the scene and the culture. And it's, we are the people that we are because of that. So
absolutely.
I'm thankful to be doing these shows again.
But you got to pack up. So last question for you. Where can everyone find you, or whatever you would like to plug online? And I'll let you go so you can get your flight.
Again, a band called Despised Icon. Look us up, Despised Icon, on any social media platform, despisedicon.com. If websites are still cool, and voila.
Awesome. Well, enjoy your trip, safe travels, and hopefully, since I live in Michigan, I'll try to get up that way, because I have heard of your brewery. A lot of friends that are into the beer game that tour have told me about your brewery, and I hear there's some very delicious beers up there. So I very much need to figure out a way to get up there or something and get some beers.
If you do, let me know, man.
Absolutely. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Good talking to you. Take care.
Yeah, you as well.
So that was my conversation with Alex. Once again, want to thank him for taking the time. Had I known that he had a flight, I probably would have tried to wrap it up a little bit earlier, but all things considered, I really enjoyed talking with him. And, you know, I realized, and I was thinking about this after we got done with the chat, is I literally had to then go to work and do, you know, work in the hospitality field that I'm back in now, working at a brewery. But it was one of those things where talking about the transitioning of our lives, you know, being as old as we are, myself 38, I think he said he was 42, where basically it's like, you know, we have lived music most of our lives. Alex more so than me, actually touring, managing, doing a bunch of other things. But being able to parlay the things we've learned, the successes that we've had in our own respective realms of what we've done within the music industry, and then being able to parlay that into the service industry. I think a lot of people would assume, and I know I've talked about it with like TJ Miller from Still Remains, where it's like you get done touring and maybe you spent all of your youth and part of the beginning phase of your adult life, and all you've done is tour. And most people would look at that going, well, what skills do you have? All you've done is shucked responsibility for the last 10, 15 years. And I honestly think a lot of touring can be applied to day-to-day jobs. You've learned accounting. You've learned how to keep a schedule. You've learned how to probably do a lot of accounting type stuff. You've learned how to, you know, communicate with people between emails or phone calls or whatever. You've learned about budgets with your recording contracts. You've learned about contracts. You've learned about all of these things that I think actually apply to a lot of real world jobs. I just don't think people necessarily think about that. But it is one of those where I feel like the service and hospitality industry is essentially like being in a band. You have to, like, you don't have to be nice, but if you're not nice, then people aren't going to fucking like you and aren't going to want to support you. So you have to kind of present a certain way, not inauthentically, but you have to present a way that is engaging and makes people want to come and support you and want to keep coming back. And you are selling yourself at all times, just like you would be whatever it is that you are selling while you're working at a job. There's a lot of through lines, and I am not surprised when people find success in any of those things. And I tend to find that, honestly, a lot of musicians tend to be more successful at non-band things because they know how to ride out real shit environments and endure because they believe in something. And it always baffles me sometimes when I hear how hard it is for people to be like, oh, well, it's hard for me to get a job when I'm off tour because no one wants to hire me because I'm da-da-da. And I'm like, I almost feel like that would be the person I'd want. Yes, it would kind of be at the detriment of a long-term relationship with an employee, but to me, I know that you're going to bust your ass because you need the job. You need to make money while you're off work. And that if I somehow reward you with a job, and then I even somehow am able to figure out how to make it work while you're gone, that you can come back, then I know I have still a great employee that will come back to me. And I've seen it countless other times in this industry, kind of a side tangent real quick, but, I remember this guy coming in every day when I was GMing a restaurant out in Ann Arbor. And this guy came in every day asking if we were hiring any more people. And I unfortunately had to be like, we're not. And I remember saying something to my boss, my DM, and I was like, I really want to take a chance on this guy. I was like, he's been up front that he is out of jail, out of prison, whatever. And I was like, but he's walking here every day. He's asking if we're hiring every day. He's doing it to every business. He wants to work. I go, that's the kind of person I want. I want someone who knows what they want and are ready to be accountable. And I remember I had to fight with my bosses and all the owners that they did not want me to hire this person in light of me having a bunch of college-age kids who didn't want to show up, would literally just quit without even saying they're quitting. And I was like, let me take an opportunity. Let me take a chance with this person who wants it. And that dude became one of my best employees. And everyone was shocked except for me because I was like, this is someone who clearly wants this. This is someone who is willing to make the sacrifices of getting up and walking somewhere to humble themselves, to ask for a job, who has gone through this rehabilitative part of his life. That's the kind of people I want to bet on. Those are the kind of people that deserve another chance, a second chance, even a first chance potentially. But I think that too often we see people's past and we are quick to write them off. And to me, I feel like you see a lot of that in the hospitality industry, but some of the best people and the ones that work their asses off are ones that probably don't look good on paper necessarily. Quick little side tangent, sorry about that story, but I was reminded of that story when talking about just kind of being older, and that was really the point, is the gentleman was older, and we wanted to appeal to a youthful demographic, and that was part of the other struggle with getting this person hired. But it's one of those things that it's a great story, and I love that Alex told the story of him transitioning into working in the hospitality field and how he has been able to find success with people who believed in him when he didn't necessarily maybe believe in himself or didn't feel he had much to offer and didn't want to hand out. He wanted to earn all of his opportunities. And to me, that is why I love the service industry, why I love the bar industry, because it's made of so many self-motivated, self-starting people. A lot of people, I think, write us off because we don't have a traditional 9-to-5, and I definitely don't believe that is the case. So with all that said, sorry to get on my little soapbox there, but obviously something I feel passionate about and why I enjoyed talking to Alex about that so much. If you would like to keep up with Despised Icon, you can find them at Despised Icon on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Go to despisedicon.com, pick up anything you would like, tour information, merch. They have a ton of merch. One of the bands that still just kills the merch game, even if you go to their Facebook page, a lot of it seemingly is new merch drops. Like I was saying earlier, I remember seeing all of their merch at shows and online and in people's photos on MySpace. Like the game still hasn't changed for them. They still know how to corner that market and still know how to do all that shit. So very much a band that maybe doesn't play as much, but still knows how to make an impact where they can. If you would like to keep up with Alex, you can find him at AlexErian514 on Instagram and Twitter. Those are in the show notes. If you don't know how to spell any of that, just look down below. There it is. If you'd like to keep up with the podcast, simple enough, BrewSpeakPod on all your social medias. You can go to Patreon/BrewSpeakPod, and you will find us if you would like to support us monetarily. If you would like to email me about anything about the show, guests you'd like to see on the show, whatever, you can email me at brewtallyspeaking@gmail.com. I want to thank our sponsors once again. Rockabilia, really great story from Alex sharing the different shirts that he was into. Really jealous of the Biohazard shirt. I really need to get one myself. And also want to thank Starving Artist Brewery. Have really enjoyed having them on. Looking forward to a care package here pretty soon, getting some of their beer. So you'll hear me talk about some of their beer. I have had their beers before. I very much enjoyed them. And there is more developing on that front as well. Hint, hint, hint. And we will reveal more when we can. All of that said, for the Brewtally Speaking podcast, I am John, and I'll return next time with Dino from Fear Factory. That was a bit of a shorter chat than normal, but equally as awesome. Can't wait to get that one to you. Lots of fun stories. And I'll talk to you all then.